Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Sunday Social. Should be a pretty interesting show. I'm sure there'll be no lack of opinions on this one, but I'm joined by my cast here. I'm joined by Todd from TikTok Talk, Mark from On Liberty 1859 on Instagrams, Dave from Scottish Watches, and then Todd from @SeikoTodd on Instagram. Your newest repository of vintage Seiko information on Instagram. Well, should we do a wristwatch check? Todd, you're actually in the lower corner this time. What watch are you wearing?
Today I have got to find out where I put my camera. I'm still experimenting with all this silly interweb stuff, but I have my Seiko. Let's see if it makes sure. Let's see how this works. Seiko was commonly called the UFO. It's the yacht timer. There we go. Ooh, nice. A little bit later on, cool. Yacht timer that's been restored. Love these. They're big, right? They're big 70s watches. 6138. I forgot the last four. I'm looking. I can't see it. 0011. And so they, but they have a lugless design, which is why they got the nickname UFO. And so it fits well even on my less than 7-inch wrist.
Okay, no worries. There's exuberant football watching in Todd's background.
There's exuberant American football watching going on right over there. So I'm muting while I'm not talking.
Todd, do you want to explain it very quickly, just so people know? Okay, we'll move swiftly on to Dave. Dave, what are you wearing?
Today I am wearing a Grand Seiko.
Nice.
There we go. And it is the SBGW289G Kisuke Kura, which is the 37mm hand wind little piece they launched at the back end of last year.
Oh, nice. Okay, so it's dateless. Is it got like the snowflake dial, or is it?
No, it's part of the kind of seasons collection. So this one is like, I guess it's cherry blossom to a certain extent. So it's the Sakura Kishikushi, it's called. So it's kind of like the hiding of the cherry blossom. So it's the back end of that cherry blossom season when the hairy cherry blossom starts to get covered up and such like that. So it's kind of, the classic cherry blossom they did in the US seasons collection, which was that silvery pink, which was the whole cherry blossom leaves sitting on the water thing. This one's a little bit more pink than it, and it's pretty cool. And it's got no date, which is a win in my book.
Oh, awesome. Mark, what are you wearing?
I have a Omega Seamaster chronograph, previous generation, the Regatta.
Nice.
Let's see if it actually focuses.
Shall we piece that?
Yeah, well, it's. I kind of put it on because it's black and yellow to help commemorate the new Super Racing, but it's a big old watch, that one. But it is black and yellow, and I do like that color scheme the way Omega do it.
Yeah, cool, awesome. Todd, you're up next. What are you wearing?
Tonight I brought out the Christopher Ward C9 Malvern Small Seconds. It's COSC certified one with the 120-hour power reserve. So
with the SH21, so that's got to be their own movement.
Yeah. So they did I think they did a version of that Malvern with the jump power that's in the Fears watch. Was it the Malvern that they did? Yeah, with the jump power.
There was a Malvern with the jump power. Yeah, very cool watch.
Yeah, and that was incredible, wasn't it? We had Nicholas on last week to talk about the Alliance 01, didn't we, Todd? And I think he shared with both of us how quickly that sold out. You might well tell the story.
Well, I texted him right after it happened, and he said they sold out in 2 minutes and 50 seconds.
Good grief.
With 180 people in the buy queue as it was selling out. Like, it's just unbelievable. I don't know if anybody's ever been to that fast. I know it was only 50 pieces, but that's crazy.
They're $4,000 a piece as well, weren't they? So it wasn't like it was a Bamford G-Shock,
right?
Like that $180. I mean, incredible testament to I think how passionate the Fears owners and prospective Fears buyers are. Amazing, really.
It was a beautiful watch.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll go next. I am also wearing a vintage Seiko. for the first time, I think, on the channel, and it's a Seiko LCD.
Yay!
We bought this off Whatnot, and it certainly was in a bit of a sorry state. And I cannibalized another watch and a few other bits later, and I got it to work, and it's really cool. So it's a little Seiko
Nice.
LCD. I think
Very nice.
late
Cool.
yeah, with like a little integrated bracelet. I accidentally set the alarm and it went off in the night. It's super loud. And these had their own little speaker system in them. It's not it doesn't vibrate off the back of the case. It has a separate module. So there we go. And so the topic for tonight, everyone, is going to be watch brand. And does it matter your watch brand? Does it matter to you? Does it matter about the history? Does it matter what's on the dial? So I thought I would know this. I got this on Reddit, but I don't know who actually made this. I think it's I always find it really interesting that a lot of the brands we think of as independent or wealthy that have their own, ownership are actually owned by really sort of 4 or 5 of the main companies, aren't they? Swatch Group, LVMH, Citizen there as well, and Fossil, of course. But I find this really interesting. So maybe this can help guide our conversation about, because each of these brands, I would say, certainly in the Swatch Group, have their own distinct history from there. So I don't know. I guess I'll throw it to, well, first, let me know in the comment section. Oh, am I having a problem with my mic, everyone?
You did.
You did for a second there, but I think it was more your feed than your mic. It was
Yeah.
like,
Cheers, Bill. Thanks for pointing that out. My audio is poor. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Just let me know if it keeps on like that. Okay. So I'll ask the question to the panel. I guess first off, when we're buying watches, do we gravitate to specific brands, or is there a brand that would put you off no matter how good the watch is? I guess would be a first question. Or I shouldn't start off on a negative, should I? Is there any brands that you first? We'll do that later. I shouldn't start off on a negative. Let's start off on a. Is there a brand that you automatically gravitate to when you're looking for watches? Go on, Todd. Can you talk yet, Todd? Maybe you have to do hand signals.
No, I can talk. Wait, so you mean Seiko, Todd? I want to make sure you got the right Todd. Yeah. So there's a brand that's in my name, and I forgot which one it is. Oh, yeah, Seiko. So yes, there's a brand I gravitate to. So and I can talk about how I think that this is a 36,000 Lord Marvel from the middle of the 60s, as an example. It has a linen dial. I'll try to do this trick I think I learned from somebody. Let's see. Oh, there they are. They're cheering again. My wife is very vocal. And I put a display case back on it.
Oh, nice.
So you can see the manual wind. It usually has the no, this one doesn't have the medallion, my Grand Seiko finish. And unfortunately, it's just not quite the right light where my camera is. But it's really great to actually see this thing and it's really actually, it's not a decorated movement, but it's well finished. And this is just typical of Seiko. So from my Japanese manufacturer, I think Seiko's. I still would argue maybe it's the greatest watch brand ever, but I know that's a debate. But if it's if it's Swiss, then I can't go wrong with a speed timer or Speedmaster. Oh, I said it wrong, right? A classic moon watch, as an example. See, since Patrick isn't here to rail on me for something with 30 meters of water resistance. There we go. It seems like they'll focus right here. But we've seen this before. I gravitate towards brands with lots of history, especially space history and aircraft history. I have and it doesn't have to be expensive, right? Here's a Glycine, a modern Glycine. That's a tribute. Well, it's an Airman. It's the Pumpkin. They nicknamed the Pumpkin. This is like the 14th one. And because Glycine was one of the Swiss brands that's invented the 24-hour watch. And if you have a purist Glycine, it has a 24-hour dial on it. And anyhow, so I gravitate towards watches with history. is a big
A
indication.
question about the glycine then, about if we're talking about brands specifically.
Mhm.
Did you? What was your feeling when Invicta bought glycine? Do you think it enhanced the brand? Do you think people even care anymore? Because at the time it was quite the hoo-ha, wasn't it?
Yeah, it didn't bug me at all. I think they're still glycine is still pretty much relying on their back catalog for their issues. They haven't done anything crazy or awful. I think mine I bought right as Invicta bought them. So mine's I can't remember if it's just post Invicta or pre Invicta, but it gives stability to the company. I think that's a great thing. You would argue, was it good that Tata finally bought Jaguar? Well, Jaguar never really succeeded as an independent mark. They never really made money. They were constantly, a threat of going under. And so having stability behind that. So do I care that Tata now owns Jaguar? No. I think Jaguar is still producing even more now, some really fine automobiles. I don't think it's not a problem for me.
I think I heard someone say there's a trick to knowing if it's pre or post Invicta, and it's if there's wings off of that logo.
Right. If there's wings on the W,
Yeah.
the crown rather on the logo. Yeah.
Yeah.
Purist. That's what I was thinking of. The Purist.
I like the Invicta lineup, I'm sorry. No, I don't. I like the glycine lineup. I do think it's interesting because they seem, and I was sort of new to glycine when I had one. I had a couple through my collection, but they seem to have more colorways, I think, post Invicta, which is kind of fun. They're not gaudy colorways. It's just more interesting options and choices. But I think I agree with you, Todd. I think they're staying fairly clear of the QVC monstrosities that Invicta loves to put out there.
I almost bought one of those. There was one I almost bought one just to get one. There was one like at Boscov's over here, like 50% off of whatever price they imagined an Invicta was. It was 50 millimeters.
Yeah.
You could eat off of it in a pinch. And I almost bought one just to have it, just to say, what is this? But
yeah,
it's a funny one, isn't it, Invicta? Because obviously they make those monstrously big watches, but I think that they make possibly the best mechanical watch that you can buy under. Usually you can get them for $70. That the ProMaster that they have, the Pro Diver with a Seiko NH35A in that sometimes on those Amazon Black Friday deals or whatever, Amazon sales, you can get them for $70. And bearing in mind that the movement is arguably $35, but it's a full stainless steel case, stainless steel bracelet, a decent bezel. I mean, it's got the date on it. It's got mineral crystal with a cyclops. It does cheekily look like a Submariner, to be fair, but they've etched their name down the side of it just to let you know if you're confused that it's it also the sizing is off from a Submariner, to be fair, but it definitely has the Mercedes hands. Although they've done many different versions of it now with all different hands and different color finishings and all sorts, and it's such a departure, isn't it? That you think, wow, okay, they can obviously make a really decent looking watch, and they made one that was sort of a homage to the early Submariner, didn't they? The first Submariner.
I had that one for a minute. That one was very cool. It actually was cool. It was like $80. It was a great looking watch.
Yeah. Dave, what do you think? Is there any brands that you gravitate to, or?
I guess yes, ultimately is a truthful answer because, if I look through my collection, there's certainly some brands that I've got significantly more watches of from that brand than others. I don't tend to let myself be driven to buying something because it is a brand, but it so happens that certain products I like are made by a brand. Speedmaster, Seamasters. I like a lot of what Omega does. I also don't like a lot of what they do, but they do a lot of watches that appeal to my aesthetic, my taste, whatever. I'm not really bothered by who the brand is. Like, it can be a brand that's got a great name, a brand that's got a so-so name, a brand that's got a poor name. If I like what they do and the product intrinsically I quite like, I'll certainly have a look at it. What does put me off, though, is fake brands. And by that, I mean and there's some big names out there that, have revisionist history, will we say? We'll go with that. In terms of, their backstory, and that does put me off. They still sometimes have some nice product, I think the most obvious one, we'll use the word allegedly, but let's say allegedly Panerai might have a slightly dubious historical memory. We'll go with that. And they do some cool watches still, but there's, it just leaves a bit of a sour taste in my mouth, kind of like the whole trying to make money off of something that, why don't they stick with just a decent narrative? If you make a nice product, you don't need to have that backstory. I think there's too many brands that rely on a cool backstory to sell an average product. I'd rather buy a really good product that has no backstory. Look at all these independents they're not old brands. Chaikin in Russia, he's not been at it that long, and he does some really cool products. There's plenty of Swiss brands, MB&F and these brands. They're not that old. They've got no real history. They're just people doing something cool. So I don't think you have, for me certainly, you don't have to have that whole narrative that goes with it. So yeah, do I get driven by brand to a degree, but do I try not to? Yes.
Mark, what do you think on that, Mark?
I'm kind of with Dave on this. My collection has predominantly two brands, Christopher Ward and Omega. And a lot of it is I find I like the design language. There's a lot of Christopher Wards I don't like. They didn't make anything I liked last year, for example, apart from the Bel Canto. And with Omega, there's a lot of Omegas I don't like, but the Seamaster is something that I do. So I try and use brand as an indicator of whether I like it's a shortcut to will I like the product. But if something comes out that's got something unique like that Chrono Techno with the very black dial, I'll buy it in an instant. And I do find quite a lot of the brand hype just makes me very nervous, a lot of brand hype.
Yeah. Suppose, Todd, what do you think on this one?
I'm kind of along the same lines. I do tend to prefer, though, I will say, a brand name. And by that, I mean, I get leery of Kickstarter brands and really get leery of a lot of these Amazon brands, because I want to be able to know that I can have the watch fixed. When I buy a watch, I intend to keep it my whole life and then give it to my kids someday. So I want it to have that kind of staying power and not just be like some of the ones that, just end up in the bin because it was just it was fun for a minute, but now I can't even get parts for it, or it's, they don't even make the pieces. So I tend to want a brand name, but I'm pretty huge on how big, as long as it's something that that has a backstory, I'm interested.
Yeah, I think I'm a sucker for a backstory. I think more than the brand itself, the watches that are backed on Kickstarter, the Walbrook Skin Diver, for example. I mean, that had a great backstory that it might have been worn by Neil Armstrong on one of the test flights. Like, nobody knows. They found the Walbrook in like a box of watches that his brother inherited, but his brother's like, oh, he could have worn this, and that was enough. they had me at hello. It's like that new Magnum PI watch that I keep flirting with. It's not even they're just recreating a watch that was worn on Magnum PI. It's adjacent. It's that dubious, association. Although the family that own the Momentum watch company, apparently they also own this Chrono Sport. So there's like a little link. I'm definitely a sucker for the story. I think that's what the problem that a lot of today's point, a problem that a lot of the micro brands had a couple of years ago was they came up with these stories. I think some of them hinged on Italy for some reason. Like, people went on holiday to Italy, or they had my father was Italian, or he met an Italian gentleman at a cafe and they discussed a watch, and this was the birth of the idea. I feel like the micro brands almost are on a back foot straight away, aren't they? Unless they've got they can't just come out and say, we thought we could sell a watch for $200 out of these parts, and we made it look a bit like another watch, so you'd have some familiarity with it. And that would just be like the awful backstory, wouldn't it, if they went down that line? So they have to kind of weave these stories around it.
There was a brand that almost caught me with. They had a very. You were talking one of those Italian. It was Filippo Loretti or something like that. They had this great. They had great marketing pieces.
Mhm.
The YouTube videos were great, and you're like, I'm starting to buy this guy's story until you start doing research, and then you're like, well, it's just another Daniel Wellington watch. But they did spin a good yarn.
Yeah, Ben did a great job lampooning them with the spaghetti scametti
Yeah.
video. Oh, I was on the floor just laughing because he produced that so well. That was fantastic.
Yeah. It's yes, it was hilarious because he essentially allegedly ordered the watch from the same Chinese factory because he got it to look very similar to one of their standard. It was the same with Daniel Wellington and all of these are also the obscure like two British names put together that seem to we've got a watch company, Charlesford or something. And then they just come up with these brand names as well. Somebody has made an outrageous comment here, and we'll address it. Somebody said Fears has a force story for a micro brand.
Hot take.
Discuss.
This Fears has one of the best. I think the best, most genuine backstories of a watch brand. I think of a newer watch brand in living memory. I don't know. That's my view.
I think it's fair to say, if you don't know Nick particularly well, or you don't know the people involved, and actually I would argue micro brand, they're not a micro brand, he employs a fair number of people now. They are a serious business that is put together. They might not do huge volume for sure, but I would really argue they're not a micro brand by any stretch of the kind of imagination. Before I go into that bit, I think for me, with a lot of these startup brands, I can't stand this let's make up a story or make up a narrative BS. I just bang my head against a sharp wall. It's just horrific. I tend to buy into them if the person is likable. So, like, for example, Nick at Fears, or maybe a real micro brand like Studio Underdog, a young kid that's just got a truthful, good story, that there's no embellishment. There's just like, I got bored during lockdown. I'm an industrial designer. I drew some watches and I thought I'm going to try and make these. And I did, and a kind of very tongue-in-cheek thing on the website where, there's a picture of the accounts department, there's a picture of him, there's a picture of like the shipping department, and there's a different picture of him, there's a picture of every department to run a business with just different pictures of himself. And you're kind of like, that I think is quite cool, and I happen to quite like the product. It's not high horology or anything by any stretch, but I can buy into that. I think, okay, 500 UK, nice kid, met him, seems like a good guy, and he's all kind of like put together and doing something. I like that. Most of the other brands, you just like, come on, guys, like you're just trying to have a cover story. It's like snake oil salesman, it's a cover story to sell the same old crap that everyone else is selling. And some of them are better and some of them aren't, but if they have to come up with this convoluted backstory, it usually says the product can't stand on its own 2 feet.
I think another one that's done well is Jonathan Ferrer of Brew.
Yeah, Brew exactly.
Brew, yeah.
He's to me like almost like the American Studio Underdog. Very similar idea. Young kids with a cool idea, a little bit of an original take on things, and doing it the hard way. And like people buying into them as individuals. And I'm sure that people buy Studio Underdogs or buy, those watches, or even Fairer in the UK as well, because they quite like the people more than necessarily they like the product.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was thinking about the micro, some of the. It's unfair to say micro brands. Some of these watches that were being sold bulk with these fake stories, because they went through a period for a long time of, and they got bored of it pretty quick because they realized it didn't resonate with people when they were like, oh, this is the same as a Swiss luxury watch, except you're not paying Swiss luxury prices. And it was like, oh my God, after like the 100th time of hearing that or being emailed it, you're like, come on now.
Yeah. You've just summarized Pete McConville's video about Christopher Ward.
Oh yeah, Eric summed it up. Eric summed it up here. Blah blah blah. Affordable luxury, cutting out the middleman.
Yeah.
Yep.
To be fair with that comment, I mean, that's why initially I was nervous with Christopher Ward. I when I first came across them, I was like, oh, it felt like one of those brands, but boy, the deeper you go down that rabbit hole, as you know, Mark.
Yeah.
So they're like, whoa, this is a fantastic brand. But
Yeah.
the blah, 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 affordable luxury is definitely what they were starting with.
Yeah. I see someone's asking the question, what's the threshold for micro brand?
Yeah, we discussed this last week.
I would go with, if it's a one-man band, or one, to be more politically correct, one-person band who's either sourcing product and having it put together by a third party for them, finding a factory that will make them some watches, and they've maybe kind of sketched something up, anything from pick things out of a catalogue and get it put together, or maybe get a few inverted commas bespoke things done and put it together. That's a micro brand. I think when a brand starts moving into being a registered limited company, having 4 or 5 members of staff that are paid full time and are salaried, have an actual office in a country, and have retained professional services, that's not a micro brand anymore. That's a small business, and that's a very different thing. You can't easily walk away from that. If you're one guy that's set up, you can make 50 watches, sell them, and piss off to the pub, and no one's going to bat an eyelid. If Nick decided to do that, for example, at Fears, there would be quite a lot of noise from a lot of people saying, hang on a minute, this is a business and you can't just walk away from it. I think that's a very fundamental difference for me between a micro brand and, a small watch business.
Right.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Sam. I'm sorry.
No, sorry, I was going to say, and Fears, Christopher Ward, they certainly don't refer to themselves as micro brands.
Right.
Fears would
CW, is not a micro brand, which is certainly with the recent innovations they've been bringing for the last several years. I mean, that's because they have somebody on staff that understands watchmaking, that understands the engineering, that understands the manufacturing, to put all these pieces together. And they're a true boutique, right? I think they're a boutique brand. But let's look at Roger Smith. How many people work with him? There's not a lot.
Oh, there's more than you think. More than you think.
But that's because there's a guy that the brilliant, Tony Stark of watchmaking is there directing, and things are being made by him and his team. RGM, one of my favorite brands. I'll eventually get something here in the US. If we look at what they do, they built their own tourbillon, the Pennsylvania tourbillon. I mean, come on, that's just that's the difference between
Roger Smith. Roger Smith, has a big building that's a work. As a
does he? Okay, he's bigger than I thought.
Is it a manufacturer? He owns 7-figure CNC machines and has CNC operators that work for him. That ain't no micro brand by any stretch of the imagination. Even brands like Anordane in Glasgow. People sometimes say, "Oh, they're a micro brand," and you're like, "Well, when you've got 5 full-time enamelers, 5 full-time watchmakers, industrial designers, a whole building and a manufacturing, and a manufacturing setup with expensive machinery, you ain't a micro brand. You're a legitimate small business that happens to be low volume. It's like turning around and saying some supercar makers that only make 2 or 3 cars a year, are they a micro car business? No, they're a supercar manufacturer. They just don't make very many cars.
And by the same token, you can take some of the autorology independent watchmakers that are only 2 or 3 people, and they're not micro brands only either, even if they only make 12 watches a year, because of the quality of the workmanship and the thought that goes into it. It's that third party, extra country manufacturing, maybe the Kickstarter launch criteria that fits what a micro brand is.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I suppose that's another thing on Kickstarter is the Kickstarter brands, they have to build that story, don't they? I've got approached by 2 this week, actually. Normally I don't respond to them, but the story kind of resonated with me on both of those. But how do you look at Kickstarter brands to start with, and how do you feel about brands like Yema that keep going back and dipping in that well of Kickstarter, as a brand?
I've bought quite a lot of stuff, not even just watches, on Kickstarter. I'm one of those idiots that was on it from very early on. I think I'm at about 300 backed projects or something like that now.
Oh wow!
Wow.
Yeah, because I'm a sucker for some weird and wonderful lunatic idea that someone comes up with, and I reckon touch hairy wood, I've been pretty lucky. I think 2 or 3 have been outright scams and I've lost my money. But I'm not one of these people that jump onto the comment sections and say, I demand a refund. You're an idiot if you demand a refund from Kickstarter. You should have read the T's and C's before you began. You know, maybe 2 or 3 have been like properly stiffed on. Fine. That's, you know, for me, that's not the bad odds. A couple haven't come to fruition because they tried hard and it didn't work. A handful have been just crap products when they arrived, but I've had some absolutely awesome little products from that. In fact, I will reach one right now for a little brand.
Yeah, I backed 2. I backed Walbrook and I backed Mayen, and both of the actual Kickstarter watches weren't as good as I thought they were going to be, but you could tell where they were going, and both of those companies have gone on to do very well. Oh, yeah. What's this?
This is one of the coolest. That was one of the coolest things I ever did in Kickstarter, which is a guy that does it's a book, but it's a light.
Oh,
that is cool.
And actually, they've now been. That was 10 years ago. I got that in Kickstarter. 10 years.
Oh, wow.
I use it every day. It still works a treat. And the company just actually celebrated their 10th birthday, and they're now ranged by some of the biggest high-end interior design kind of places in the world, all over the world. So it can work. And I've got some cool little watches. You know, like I got IkePods when they decided to bring IkePod back. And that's turned into you know, a perfectly legitimate brand that goes to big watch shows and is ranged by ADs worldwide. There's definite success stories there. Some brands like Yima, like you said, I don't mind them going back and dipping in there occasionally. I do when they're doing it a long time down the line. It strikes me as a business that hasn't quite sussed out how to revenue themselves yet.
Exactly.
And,
they've got something
and that for
wrong.
me, there's something intrinsically not running there, you know. I mean, I think I've got 2 watches I'm waiting on from Kickstarter at the moment, which are both weird and wonderful, and it'll be quite interesting to see one when it comes out.
Yeah, and this Andreas, I think this is the first time you've joined the live stream, but thank you for you teeing these up for us. Thank you.
Yeah.
So Andreas has put Norqain has some BS in their marketing, which be a red flag. Anything that they say in their marketing, Norqain, is true. Like, they are linked. Their father worked for Ulysse Nardin. They've got links with Breitling. Their watches that they make are, however good you think they are, they're probably better. They make some incredible watches. I
agree. It's probably true in that the story might be a tad contrived. We'll be polite. A tad contrived, but you don't need to do much homework to realize that there is. And I'm not talking about real money. I'm talking about serious money behind that business. You know, that business will only fail because, well, it won't fail. That's the thing. It just won't fail, that business. You know, you don't suddenly get to spec Kenissi movements in a new startup brand unless you have got seriously deep pockets.
And
yes,
they've been making some beautiful, beautiful watches. I mean,
I agree.
I'm not necessarily a fan of this new bioceramic line they've got going, but I like everything else they make.
Yeah, it's like a Breitling watch. The one that I had was one of their first production ones. I forget which one it was, but it was the blue one that they launched with, and it was like a Breitling for half the price. It was incredible, and it's probably because they do have these links within the industry. So, Andreas, thank you for all the great questions.
It does make me wonder with Norqain how much change we'll see with Jean-Claude Biver being part of a consultant or part of them. You know, sort of, will they lose? How will their design language change in line with his thoughts?
Yeah.
Do you know, for me, I think the interesting thing that a lot of people probably in Europe aren't quite putting 2 and 2 together with Norqain, and where it's very, very clever, is it's a brand that's been engineered to have a genuine, really good quality Swiss-made product that is entirely geared to marketing to average American citizen who likes the idea of a brand that's got American ties in it. If you look at it, it is absolutely flying in North America, and it's not doing so well elsewhere. But if you look at everything, it's geared entirely towards that. I've got $2,000-3,000. I'm probably going to buy one quality watch in my life, and I want something that's maybe got some little flavor of America in there, and that's where Norqain's playing that game.
And you can see how successful they are because they're in places like Tourneau or whatever it's called now in New York.
And they're selling. And
they're selling.
They are absolutely selling. You
Well,
go to
those
Europe.
hockey watch. They made like that hockey watch, didn't they? That was
Mhm.
that was associated with the National Hockey League or something,
Yeah.
or the
Yeah.
and that was incredible because you thought, oh, a Swiss company is making what looked like a bespoke watch for it was the federation or something, or but it was really clever the way that they did that. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
really interesting.
And can't knock them for doing that. But if you
And
go
the
to
quality
Europe,
is excellent.
yeah, if you go to Europe though, you see a lot of folk look at it and they kind of go, "Oh, I don't get it. Why would I buy that when I can buy a Tudor or I can buy a Breitling that I know?" And that's the difference. But America's a pretty bloody big market, to be honest with you. So
And-
if they are only ever successful there, they'll do quite nicely. Thank you very much.
And if you're going to be an the sort of the brand anti snob, I'd much rather buy a Norqain than a Tudor.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and I think that's true as well.
The only funny thing of that I always find out about Norqain is when they email you, they call their fans Norqainers, which I always think might be something you need to go to a 30-day rehab for. Oh, I'm a Norqainer. I've got so a hot take here from Sam. Norqain is Hublot. On the cheaper side, they share the same DNA.
I don't necessarily disagree with that. You can see it. It's not quite as gaudy, maybe, as Hublot, I would say, but it's got that same kind of very, I don't know what you want to call it, like nouveau riche almost. It's like the kind of, I'll use the word tasteless, but that's an unfair way to say it. But it's kind of like someone who wants to buy a watch that is a statement on their wrist and kind of wants to flash it in your face and go, look, I've got an expensive watch. You know, that's kind of for me a lot of what Hublot is. It's like it is a good quality product, but it smacks of look at me. It's a bit like buying a Lamborghini Countach. You know, there's much better looking supercars, but not so many shout, check out what I'm driving. It's the same kind of narrative, I think. And I think Norqain's got a wee bit of an edge of that.
Adrian at Bark and Jack described Hublot in the best way that I've ever heard anyone describe it. He said that Hublot price is a specification of the watch. Price is the feature of the watch. It's not the two are, and they do make some. They move this, and it's amazing, you know, considering the amount of marketing that Hublot do and their association. You very rarely see them in the wild. I mean, I know somebody at work who's got one, and he's got the really nice, the thin one, the really the understated one. It's not one of the big ones. It looks really cool, actually. I was surprised at how much I liked it when I saw it in person, but you don't see many out in the wild, do you? Or I certainly don't.
Well, the last time I saw one was a guy actually driving a Lamborghini, as it happens.
Yeah.
So you're right on, Dave.
Yeah. I mean, do you know, it's funny because it's the same. You know, people look at Hublot who maybe have a bit of knowledge about what the actual technicalities of the product are, and they're like, how can they get away with charging that for that watch? You know, it's the same argument of why can a brand charge whatever 5 figures for a watch that's got a Sellita movement in it, and you can buy a watch with the same Sellita movement for, you know, a tenth of the price, yada yada yada. Every industry does it. It's about, like as you said, the way Adrian described it, people want to sometimes be seen to spend money, and that's part of the thing. It's funny, there's an interesting little channel I follow on YouTube, and it's a British guy who buys written off supercars. So once the insurance company have decided it's a write-off because it's not economically viable to fix it, but they're perfectly fixable, and he buys these and then documents the whole putting it back together process. And he just bought a Lamborghini, and he needed a new throttle body for its engine.
Oh yes, I saw
And it
this.
was £6,500 for the throttle body from Lamborghini. And he took it apart and found a part number in it and Googled it. And it turns out that it's a throttle body from a Volvo V70. And he managed to buy one for £140. And it was exactly the same part, barcode, everything. And so, you know, watches aren't any different.
Mhm.
But Lamborghini price it that way, because when you go and buy a spare part for Lamborghini and you find out that that part's 16 quid, you get really upset about why you spent a couple of $100,000 on your car.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, to your point, isn't Richard Mille basically the same thing as Hublot, just at another level then? Because it's just showing off. This is because I can
100%.
afford it.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. That's the thing with the micro brand discussion that we were having as well. Christopher Ward, from what Mike says, make more watches than Richard Mille make a year, and you certainly wouldn't class Richard Mille as they're a major watch company. But I suppose I suppose we should get into the difficult topic now in the last 20 minutes, or one of them is there any brands that that can't do, it doesn't matter how good the watch is, you just can't bring yourself to buy them? I mean,
Yes.
if Invicta made it, yeah. Go on, Dave.
Broadly for me, actually, I've owned one in my life, and I bought it for the entirely wrong reason, which was to wind somebody up. But Rolex, and that's the reason.
Wow, okay.
And I'll tell you why. It's a combination of things. Are they the most successful watch brand, bar none? Absolutely. You know, are they the most recognizable name, not just in watches, just one of the most recognizable luxury brand names, or just brand names, full stop? Absolutely. Have they therefore done their job? Yes. Perfect. I don't want to wear something where the general narrative of that brand is, and sorry, anyone that's got a Rolex, I'm an asshole.
Like me.
You know, that's literally how I see it. It's so many people buy it as an outright status symbol. Do they make some cool watches though that are
Hello, Sam.
really cool technically? Yes, but you know, and like Ricky's got one right, and it's fine. But I think the problem is there is this overarching. Then you've got all the issues with crime. You've got all the issues with people who are believing that it's an investment class and yada yada. And you've got all, you know, the whole. How many of the grey market wouldn't exist if Rolex didn't exist in the way it does? Yeah. The vast majority of it wouldn't exist. And then you've got, and this is the worst bit for me, a company who their moral stance and how they behave sometimes, not so pleased about that. And, you know, like only the most recent example is the whole thing with the Oyster and what's their surname? Oyster and Pop, the little British educational company who make clocks that are getting cease and desist letters. You know, you're just like, come on, guys, really? Oh, yes, because, quote, somebody will, you know, confuse a £20 wall clock that teaches kids how to tell the time with a Rolex watch. Sure, yeah, okay, whatever you say, you know, and that's why things like that. That's what things like that will put me off buying a product, and yeah, so I just wouldn't do it. Simple as that.
Probably the best thing that ever happened for that kid's wall clock company.
Yeah.
Well, you say that right, but I can guarantee you, if you were that business and you were getting letters from Rolex lawyers, you probably would be a bit terse.
Or several. So I'll say it best here. Ouch. The Rolex side. I was a big Rolex collector. Just watch now.
Yeah. You know what? It's the same as anything. It's like, you know, it's like the classic thing in the UK. Certain car brands have got notorious reputations. It doesn't mean that there's legitimate BMW guys out there and legitimate Audi guys. Doesn't mean that there's an awful lot of people buying it because, you know.
Yeah, you know what? I don't know if you know this, Dave, but one of the things that struck me when I moved to America is how bad a reputation Audi's got for reliability in the US. Whereas in the UK, nobody ever questions everybody buys Audis. Like they're considered quite a reliable car.
A lot of Audis in the UK are sold on PCPs or 2 or 3 year leases, so you don't get to see the reliability problems.
Yeah, a brand new car from anybody is usually pretty reliable. You know, that's or if it's under warranty. If it's under warranty, you don't really care because you don't foot the bill for it, do you? But yeah, I mean,
old Audi, in the US has a bad reputation. It's it's just
that took me by surprise. That was one of the things that took me by surprise. It was a culture shock because I'm like, wow, everybody drives Audis in the. But you're right, Dave. Everybody leases the cars in because you lease a Volkswagen or an Audi, and you just keep rolling.
But again, it's a classic it's a status symbol, isn't it? It's like it's the classic upper middle class, middle management status symbol of you've got an A4 or an A6 on your drive, and you're better than the neighbour that's only got a Volkswagen Golf. That's pretty much how it rolls in the UK. Yeah. And if you get an RS, you're a drug dealer. But you know, just saying.
Audi have been very clever to build.
You're not
for, you know, they have done that segment the market as they go up in price very well.
Yeah. You know, Audi is Hublot.
Yeah.
So who wants to take this next? Is there any?
Well, I want Dave to answer the question here from Bandrew, because now I'm curious if I'm going to be in the same bucket as Sam.
Does that extend to Tudor for you, or is it just Rolex proper? if I'm honest, it should extend to Tudor because it's from the moral standpoint part. At the end of the day, that's all coming from the same place. It's the same company. I think Tudor has a very different brand perception. In terms of in the marketplace, it's seen as being a good value, inverted commas, proposition. It's still an expensive wristwatch. Let's not kid ourselves on, but it has a slightly different, I think, perception. If you ask Joe Average in the street,
no clue.
Have you ever heard of Tudor as a watch brand? They'll just look at you as if you've got two heads, And if you say to them, "Oh, it's basically a Rolex," or "It is a Rolex," they'd be like, "Well, no, it's not." So, I think there's that. But I quite like what I like about Tudor that I don't like about Rolex as well is they actually are willing to experiment a little bit. They do things like the PO1, which is I think it's a cool watch, and
that one.
And the fixed lug Pelagos, and even just the Pelagos, to be honest, and the left-hand drive, and all of these things, like it's almost like a little bit of a seeding ground sometimes for what might possibly little bits of it might appear in Rolex later on. Like the left-hand drive Pelagos was out for years before Rolex decided to do a left-hand drive watch, So, yes, but no.
I'm a fan of that black ceramic Fast Rider. I mean, I only ever seen them online, but I think that's a beautiful watch.
Yeah. I'm becoming less and less enamored with Tudor, to be fair, as time goes on. A couple of years ago, I was like, yeah, this is quite cool, but it seems to rapidly be becoming baby Rolex. And I think they're trying to engineer that.
Oh, I think Rolex is definitely engineering that. I think they're trying to go up market and fill the hole that is current Rolex with Tudor.
Yeah. Nobody wears a Tudor for status, Andreas is saying.
Nobody currently does, and I think that's true. Up until now, that's true. I think you'll be surprised in the next few years how much that will change if Rolex and Tudor get their act together, which they seem to be doing. Suddenly you've got high street boutiques, and Tudor will end up being a boutique-only brand in the same way as Rolex is.
Tudor have learned from some terrible marketing mistakes in the US as well. Today was the Daytona 24-hour motor race, sponsored by Rolex, and the winners get a Daytona. A lot of people don't know that Tudor used to sponsor that racing series, except the 24-hour. And the only time you'd know it was Tudor was because they had a banner on a bridge across a track. They just made no effort whatsoever. And 12 months later, that sponsorship is gone. But they've learned a lot about marketing since then.
Yeah, we've got another good question actually, because we haven't discussed it. I don't mind the brand that much if the product is on point. What do you guys think of Formex? Because arguably, I've never seen one in person, but I know
very nice.
Them, they're supposed to be really up there, aren't they?
The Essence Leggera is a classic. It's one of those I want to own and haven't got to yet.
You see, Formex as well as a company that most folk, even folk who are into watches, don't, I think, necessarily understand the background of that company. Formex makes some cool watches, absolutely no doubt about it. But again, they ain't going anywhere. The vast majority of their business, like 95% of it, if not more, is business to business. They're singularly one of the biggest suppliers of bracelets and clasps to the entire Swiss watch industry, bar none.
And they have some intellectual property around that.
They've got some really strong patents, especially with things like micro adjustments and clasps and in deployance and such like as well. That brands, everyone from folk like let me think, Ulysse Nardin use clasps that use their patents. Girard Perregaux use clasps that use their patents. There's some big hitter high end Swiss brands that are using stuff that's either designed and made for them by Formex or the background company to Formex. Formex are, the brand's kind of like the plaything where they can do some cool stuff because they can. So yeah, they actually make some really cool product.
I think they're very clever too. This new one they have that has that interchangeable bezel. It's like selling the razors and you got to keep selling the blades because the bezel's that easy to pop off. I feel like people are going to be losing them left and right. And I need a new bezel. Like,
well, that's a whole separate show about.
What's that?
Oh, that's a whole separate show about OEM straps and bracelets and unique fixtures and quick releases. That's a whole separate show.
Yeah. True.
Does anyone else want to take the question of, is there a brand you wouldn't buy no matter how good a watch they ever made?
I don't think so.
I'm pretty
No.
sure if it's on
Um,
AliExpress, I don't want to touch it.
Right.
I love, I, lo-
think
I love the, I love the way everyone that's in America is like the most litigious planet, the most litigious country on the planet. It's like, oh no brands that I wouldn't buy. No.
Well, the thing is, Dave, you already said exactly what I want to say about Rolex, so why should I bother?
I'll kick this off. because
I'm
I
just
know-
I'm just harsher on Tudor than you are.
I'm the same. I'm with Dave. I'm the same with Rolex. Yeah. So
Yeah,
I'm
no,
sorry,
I mean-
Sam. Go ahead.
I know. I like that. Sorry, Todd. We would have given you some chance to speak, but we, no, I will say one thing. I recently, I know Armani are trying to do a decent watch, aren't they? They're trying to do a decent kind of watch. I don't think, in my eyes, they could do anything horologically that would make me buy them.
Oh, Daniel Wellington. I don't think I'd ever buy a Daniel Wellington.
I think they're
There
out
you
of
go.
business now.
Yep.
You see, though,
None of
I think they potentially could. I know what you mean, Sam, about Armani, but if you look at, for example, Ralph Lauren, most of what they do pretty much generic, non-special fashion watches, but they've popped out a couple, over the last couple of years that are, genuinely decent quality watches with kind of, it might not be to everyone's taste, but definitely quite a funky little take on certain things, that they've done. So these brands can, if they really want to, if they put their money where their mouth is, and they've certainly got the money if they want to, they could pull out something pretty cool. Whether I'd want to see, I don't like Armani clothing, so I wouldn't buy an Armani watch on the basis of I just don't like that, whole vibe. But I'm sure there's plenty of people who would.
Yeah, no, I'm the same. I mean, for myself, another one that I wouldn't touch, no matter how good a watch they made, is. But I would buy other products that they make, which is weird. Is a Shinola, because I don't like. I don't like how they set the brand up. The only brand to be, taken in front of the Federal Trade Commission for basically lying about where the watches were made. The whole thing, that article that expose that was done about why they based the brand in Detroit when they're actually based in Texas. It makes me feel cold. If you really look into how they set the brand up, and the market research they did to see what name, where they could base the company that would make people feel sympathetic about them, and obviously Detroit was well up there. They couldn't make a watch that I would buy, Shinola. Also, they were super overpriced at the start, but but I would buy their apparently their leather goods are awesome. Their stuff like that, but the watches specifically I can't do it. And Filson by association would be the same because they're owned by the same.
Yeah.
Well,
See, funnily enough, Andreas has put again on there Gucci.
Gucci, yeah.
And that's funny, actually.
I've got a Gucci
until
wallet. Buy a watch.
Yeah, do you know, it's funny you say that, though. I would probably say I would have been the same a couple of years ago until I actually started to look at some of them. And aesthetically, a lot of it doesn't really appeal to me, but I love some of their kind of more premium pieces that they do. They're pretty well put together watches, actually. Aesthetically, though, that's what would put me off. The brand wouldn't put me off, actually. But it's a bit, for me, Gucci's a bit like where, who am I thinking? Bulgari were a few years ago.
Oh,
People very much thought they're a jewellery brand that makes some watches. And then now look what they've done with the Octafinissimo. You just hit that one thing right, and suddenly it's all good.
Good point.
Or Hermes, which are a scarf brand that makes very good watches too.
Well, I've got a Gucci wallet. My wife really likes the Gucci handbags because they are well made, but I wouldn't go there for a watch. I'm the same. I'm sort of the same. I don't, because I don't know whether you're right. I think they have to. Some of these they've got such a legacy of making very cheap watches that are very expensive, but just so blatant, that it was that. Well, they're not aimed at us, are they?
It's just it's the same thing as the Hublot and the Lamborghini. What Gucci was doing, you're selling in a high fashion store, and the ladies would go for it because it had that name on the dial.
You see, I think though as well, so many of these brands, especially I guess the fashion house brands, the Gucci's, all of these ones, they're all now reaping. They're literally now all reaping the seeds of what they sowed back in the 90s. and that was
Mhm.
that they sold the intellectual rights to use their name in cheap fashion watches for mass gain. And they knew nothing about watches. They were disinterested. They just treated a watch as an accessory, a cheap accessory that went with it to sell their expensive jeans, stroke
Jewelry.
jacket, stroke whatever. And they went to, we all know who these companies are that, don't own these brands, but they've got the rights to use the name in their watches. And they boshed out cheap crap for decades. And they sold them for a couple of $100, which was probably about, $199 more than they should have.
Right.
And folk lapped it up and they bought them by the absolute bucket load. And these brands made huge amounts of money by licensing their name and doing precisely shit all actual work. Suddenly now watches have moved into a completely different sphere where they were 20 years ago, which is it's actually a leading category. And suddenly they want to take back the ownership of their names and produce a high quality product. And it's like if you make a really bad product for long enough and then try and make a good one, no one really believes that you can do it.
Yeah,
That
it's
is
like
the exception.
Ralph Lauren's the same, isn't it? Because Polo Ralph Lauren used to be quite the fashion brand, didn't it? And then that Polo Sport came out, and it was. I mean, I used to wear it when I was a kid because that you're accustomed to that kind of musky fragrance, but you would never buy it now. It made me think negatively on Ralph Lauren.
Yeah, Burberry did the same in the UK. Burberry's always been a high-end, prestigious brand, but then the kids would buy the cap because it was like the cheapest item that they sold it, and it was still $50 for a cap, but they could access it, or they bought a scarf, and they did again fashion brands, and it's taken them 10 years to regain their place where they actually believed they always should have been. And that'll be the same with all these watches brands.
Or even,
controversial.
Well, Ferrari sold their brand around everywhere. They have the theme park. It's not a watch brand. I don't think there's ever been a Ferrari. Well, there have been recent Ferrari watches as collaborations or inspirations.
Yeah, Panerai. I mean, there has been a Ferrari. I'm sure there's been a Ferrari watch brand, or maybe I'm getting it confused with.
Girard Perregaux has a Ferrari chronograph. That's actually quite appealing.
Does Hublot make one as well? Does Hublot make? Or is it?
No, it's Richard Mille.
Richard Mille just made that one.
But it's like Porsche design for a long time had a mixture of products, didn't it? They went through a weird phase with their watches, and they did like fountain pens and all sorts of weird stuff.
We got a hot take in here on Invicta and Timex. I'm gonna have to say Timex is coming out of nowhere with awesome stuff right now.
They are,
and they're one of the oldest watch brands there is. So I don't know. I do not agree with Click and Caliber here on that one.
Yeah, I mean, some of these brands as well, some of these old US brands that have been sold to other, like, somebody's picked over the corpse, haven't they, and then bought the license to the brand. It's a shame. I mean, I always think it's naughty. I always think that a bit about why I'm not warm to Tag, really, because I feel like Hoya was the brand. I mean, it was funny because when I was a kid, I only ever wanted a Tag, and the more that I learned about the brand and the way it kind of, but having said that, Hoya was, if it was going to die, it was going to die. At least they saved them, so it's kind of, and Hoya was such an important brand horologically.
I think Tag gets a lot of up and down. I think you get a very well made watch. The movements are circumspect on some of them because of how they're sourced, but you're right. I mean, when I was a kid, it was Rolex and then Tag. Like you had accomplished something in life if you had a Tag. And I know that they're looked on poorly, but there was a time period here where that was the successful man's watch.
That was a Quartz legacy thing, I think, though. That's when they were putting out those kind of poorly made Quartz watches for a lot of money for a long time. They kind of lost their way, and I think that's the legacy still from that.
I think that's
about
true.
The 90s fashion. Didn't they use Seiko movements, Todd, like mechanical, and they were knocking them out, saying they used Seiko movements and they were knocking them out.
They bought the rights to use Seiko licensed the rights to a chronograph design that I don't think Seiko actually produced it. I'm not certain, but they licensed it to Tag, and Tag said it was an in-house caliber.
Yeah. That's part of the problem.
And that was like, no, it's not. It's a Seiko designed caliber, and you're licensing it. So
I think they were running Solita movements, but not even very well regulated too for a while too. And
Yeah.
That annoys me. Not regulating
Yeah.
movements.
But the tag Formula One watches were the watch of generations,
Oh,
whether
yeah.
you liked them or not.
Well,
I can still remember them.
it's
love
fair to
mine.
say, like tag, the thing about tag is, they're probably arguably the next most successful watch brand to the general public to Rolex.
Mhm.
Without fail, the 18th birthday present, the 21st birthday present, when the kid says, I want a watch, more often than not, depending on their social background, their means, etc., they probably all want a Rolex. Most of them realize they ain't going to get a Rolex, or they're not going to be able to spend that much money on it. And the next option generally out their mouth is, I want a tag.
Yeah.
And I think it gets a bad name as much because people kind of default automatically sometimes to it. You don't get a bad watch from, especially nowadays.
Yeah.
There's not a bad
You
watch
don't
from
get a
them by
bad
any
watch.
stretch of the imagination. You don't get a bad
Yeah.
watch at that. Can you get watch that's maybe arguably better value for money? Sure.
Yeah.
But it won't come with that brand perception. Can you buy an Oris, or can you buy like a multitude of other branded high street watches out there that are arguably better value for money than a tag? Yeah. But does it have the same cachet to that person buying it? No, it doesn't. And
No.
part of what they're doing is they want the cachet that goes with it. And, it's horses for
Why not?
courses. Yeah, I
Right.
mean, I try to avoid that. I feel guilty of it sometimes, but, there's nothing wrong with it.
The case and bracelets are very nice on them. I mean, the ones that I've had
Yeah.
at least.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd buy a Hoya one that just had Hoya on the dial, like that Ortavia they had, that chrono.
That Tavia was
It's
cool.
beautiful.
That was a
Yeah,
cool
that-
watch.
Beautiful
I would
watch.
definitely
Or-
buy it.
Or a Monaco, you can't argue. If
Oh,
you
yeah.
want a square watch, a Monaco
Buy a Monaco.
is a tag Hoyer, a Hoyer, whatever, all over it. You see that watch, if you see that shape, instinctively you think that's probably that. And if it's something else, you're like, they've ripped off tag.
Right.
Yeah, I like the Monaco a lot better now. They stopped using Steve McQueen's image. They've given him a break after 40 years using his image. He goes, a big fan of Steve McQueen. I'm like, why? He wore it in one film. Like, in real life, he wore a hand heart and a day date. Well, that's been really awesome. I don't know if we've got any more questions coming through, but yeah, we've gone the full hour. That was really
Yep.
cool. Thank you to the panel.
Yeah. Just try to see if there's any last questions.
Yeah.
Jack's one's quite interesting. Ascertaining whether someone is an a-hole based on their watch is perhaps the ultimate a-hole move.
Did I miss that one?
Good one, Jack.
to be honest, Jack, yep, you're bang on there. Never
Yeah.
judge somebody on what watch they're wearing. We can judge usually judge someone on what comes out their mouth.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there've been some good ones. I can't. I don't know if we can ask that one about Panerai, but
No,
so
you can't.
awesome. So, guys, thank you very much to the panel, and thank you everyone for being so active in the comments and keeping the conversation flowing. Very much appreciated. We could have probably gone 3 hours on this one topic, but
Yeah.
we'll go with the full
And I apologize for the cheering again going on in the background. But just as an update, the Eagles are now ahead 28-7 over the 49ers. So there's a lot of cheering going on in my household.
I thought all the cheering was for Dave comments about Rolex, but maybe not.
It could have been. It actually could have been.
Dave had his own hype man.
That's right.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone. Thanks for watching. We'll end the stream. Bye.